Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on the third book in the Mistborn Era 2 saga, and that is the Bands of Mourning. So overall, I thought Bands of Mourning delivered on so much that I was asking for this series. I thought this series had a lot of potential, and this was really the first book that felt like it stepped out of the possibility of just being short stories in Sanderson's mind and really became something of its own. It really expanded on some of the ideas and, more importantly, expanded a lot of the things that we saw from Mistborn Era 1, which I thought was a huge improvement. And I think that's part of the reason why I ended up enjoying it so much. I really liked this book, so I did end up giving it 4 stars, and I think if I had to rank it between Mistborn Era 1, I would probably have this right above the Well of Ascension and just behind the Hero of Ages and the Final Empire. That's how much I enjoyed this book. And I think a lot of that is because of so much carryover from Era 1 and then just getting a lot of things that I wanted out of this book. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and I'll tell you what I liked and what I didn't like about this book. So if you have been watching my reviews of this series, you know that I have really been asking for this world to be expanded upon. I really felt like we were stuck in the main city, Elendel, and that everything was just happening there and that there was no exploration outside of that. We got mentions of the Rough, we got some things that were going on in the broadsheets, but for the most part, everything was taking place in really one spot. And this book finally delivered on that. And part of that was it starts very early on with a flashback to Wax's childhood. And even though that kind of takes place in the same spot, it just made the world feel bigger. So that was nice. And then obviously we get so much at the end of this book that just expands everything. Obviously spoiler free, so I won't mention that, but just know that if you go into this book, that the implications towards the end of this book, and actually even in some of the stuff we learn kind of in the middle, it just blows the doors wide open for this series. And that was something that I was so excited to finally see. One, the story doesn't just take place in Elendel, but then a lot of the information and characters we get introduced to, just a lot of things it changes so much for Mistborn Era 2, and that's awesome. It almost leaves a little bit of plot holes, but I think, Sanderson is going to kind of write those away. But yeah, that was just awesome. And that's something I had been wanting so much from this series. The next positive was the romance stuff got resolved. I really feel like that is settled and done. I mentioned in my last review, there's some kind of weird love triangle thingy going on, and I just cannot stand that. And I really wanted that to just kind of be resolved one way or another, whether there be any romance at all, no romance, whatever. I just needed kind of a concrete solution for what was going to happen there. And thankfully, very much we did. And personally, if you have read this, it went the way I wanted it to go, which I think, made me enjoy that even more. But yeah, there is nothing worse than bad romances in books or weird love triangles. It's just not a trope that worked for me, hardly ever. I'm trying to think, off the top of my head, I cannot think of a single time where I have really enjoyed a love triangle. It's always something that I'm always just on one coupling side so much more than the possibility of happening another way that I just don't think it's something that I ever enjoy. So that being said, it was resolved in a great way, in a way that I wanted it to be personally, so huge positive for me there. The next positive is, and once again, with this being spoiler free, I have to be kind of careful what I say, but there are some advancements technologically that we see in this story that make me really excited for the next era. And so it's a positive, not so much for the fact that we see it in this book, but it makes me think of what we're going to see going forward. So it's one of those things where it makes me want to get to the next book quickly, and it's really going to make me sad that I don't have any idea when the next set of Mistborn books are even supposed to come out. I haven't done any research into that yet, so maybe that's something I need to look into. But, those advancements just make me wonder how things are going to work in the future and how different things are going to look. So, it just has kind of got my brain going and thinking. So I'm really interested to see where that goes. And my last positive I am going to mention here is there is definitely some more talk and consideration of free will versus predetermination. And I kind of mentioned in my last review, the philosophy aspect to it, I do find it interesting. I am by no means a philosopher or up to date on heavy philosophy and those kind of discussions, but it is always something kind of interesting to see where, you have a character who, in their mind, they want to do one thing, but maybe they have been manipulated or pushed to go another way, and they're aware of that now. And to see how they go about making decisions and everything, and just kind of that questioning that's happening was just, I don't know, it just adds an extra layer to the story where it's not just so straightforward. So I really enjoyed that as well. And now let's go ahead and talk about my dislikes. So when I talk about Mistborn Era 2 or see discourse about it on the internet, the one thing that always comes up is the humor. And this is the first book where I kind of felt that it was a negative, that the humor kind of just felt too silly. We kind of almost got to like a cartoony, literally like a Saturday cartoon kind of like humor, actiony kind of stuff. And I think in the past book, I had Wayne's antics as a positive, and in this book it felt like Sanderson was expanding some of that humor just away from Wayne and adding it into some other characters more than they have in the past. Or maybe it's just something that, because I've been entrenched in this world, I kind of read these all back to back to back, that it maybe is starting to wear on me more. And yeah, this is the first one where I was like, man, there's just more times than not where I'm like, this just doesn't seem like the place or the type of humor that I really wanted to see. I didn't need it. And so the past that it had kind of had in the previous two books where I was kind of enjoying it and it wasn't bothering me, it kind of felt like it was in place. This is the first time where, it missed the mark. And I don't think it's going to change. I think moving forward, we're going to see more of that. And I'm hoping that doesn't, bog down the story for me too much. I don't really know anything about the Lost Metal, the last book in this, but I do know that the humor is definitely one thing that people always talk about, and overall in the series it's kind of like a net neutral, because I have enjoyed it in some instances and then not in others, and this is really the first time where I'm going to have to really count it as a negative, because it didn't work for me how it had in the past, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to chop that up as a negative. The next negative is the first 30-ish, 40-ish% of this book. It just felt like it could have been chopped down a little bit. And that's actually kind of been a common complaint I've had with this whole series. I really think books 1 and 2 could have been one book. I think you could have shrunk both of those by 25-ish%, sucked them together. You might have had to rearrange some things, but I really think that this could have been a second book. I think that's the series overall, without reading the last book, obviously. I think it maybe would have been a positive for this to be a trilogy instead of having 4 books. And yeah, it really felt like we were building to something, but we kind of had to spin our wheels in a couple different places to get there. And I mean, we learned information and stuff, but I don't know. It just, the ending of this book really carried it for me. And it's not that the early part was bad. It just was that it was just too long. Even some 70 pages less, or we just kind of moved the timeline along. And that's actually where a lot of the humor bits that I didn't enjoy were stuck in. So, that, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't mind a long story. Give me a long 1,000-page book. I mean, The Words of Radiance, The Way of Kings, those are great, huge novels. Great, huge novel. That is not the problem. But I don't want it to feel like we're spinning our wheels and kind of wasting time and just kind of making the story longer. And, this is a common complaint we hear when authors get successful, is that editors don't start to be as harsh. They kind of just let authors have free reign. And I think this is, maybe an example where if there was a little bit sharper of a knife cutting out some of the fat, it could have benefited from that. My next negative is there is kind of a twist, betrayal kind of situation where, somebody is a bad guy when you're not really supposed to suspect them as being a bad guy. And I don't know, it just didn't work for me. It makes sense in the story. There's no plot holes or anything like that. It's just not part of the story that I really wanted to see. And so that's really a me negative. That's not a story negative. And I guess that's a decent distinction to make. But yeah, this person ending up being a bad guy, just, I don't know. It was just like, did we really need to introduce another? And with the way this book ends, technically, yes, we did. But I feel like it's another one of those examples where you didn't need to. We could have just kind of moved forward again, and maybe it would have felt stale if it was the same person, but I don't know. I'm just adding in another bad guy at this stage just wasn't something I needed, and it just came so out of left field that it just didn't work for me, unfortunately. And I mean, it still makes sense in the story, it works well and everything, but I really just could have not had that and just kept our main villain, you know what I mean. And then my last negative is, and this is a trope that destroy stories for me probably more than any other trope that exists, and that is a character dying but then not dying trope. And this is one that gets used very often, especially in fantasy, and it's just one that never works for me. Personally, I want consequences to have meaning. If I know that I can't trust a death, or that, the consequences can just be erased, it really makes me lose any kind of tension and any sadness that I feel towards when a character dies, because I'm just like, well, they probably won't be dead in another 50 pages, so what's it matter? And that, maybe that doesn't bother other people as much as it bothers me, but that is a trope that has continually destroyed stories for me. I have seen examples of when it is done well, where it doesn't bother me as much, but for the most part, anytime you are killing a character and then bringing them back is just not going to work for me. And that is, something that shows in this story, which is unfortunate that, I have to knock it down here, but it is what it is. And overall, I really did enjoy this book. I did give it 4 stars, like I mentioned earlier, and I am super excited to move forward and read The Lost Metal. I think before I get to The Lost Metal, I need to read White Sands, Dawn Shard, Edge Dancer, and maybe Oathbringer before I finally get back around to The Lost Metal. So I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break from this world, which is a little sad. I do really enjoy the magic system here and everything. So I look forward to getting back around to it, but that is all for me. Let me know any thoughts you have about this book or series down in the comments below, and have a good one.